We are closely approaching the 50-year anniversary of the Supreme Court handing down the infamous Roe v. Wade decision.
Roe versus Wade, when it was first established, I think caught some people by surprise because many felt that it was wrongly decided and wasn't really a strong judicial philosophy that undergirded it. And so I think there are many people in the pro-life movement and even Americans that might consider themselves pro-choice have felt that this case has necessarily needs to be overturned because it actually has been a bad precedent and is not rooted in strong judicial philosophy.
Roe versus Wade said, you may have a lot of differing opinions out there from state to state about what the abortion law should be, but we don't care. We're gonna big step over you and make sure that your voice does not make its way into the law in your state. And on something that is such a deeply held moral conviction, what an outrage that this has reigned supreme over this country since 1973, when it's about the death of little boys and girls every single day.
We've seen the left and the pro-abortion crowd argue that abortion, as we understand it for the last 30 years, is settled law. Nothing can be done about it. Well, there is no such thing as settled law when a court is wrong, and the Supreme Court has been wrong.
In a sweeping ruling in the summer of 2022, the Supreme Court ended the constitutional right for abortion, sending it back to the states to decide.
June 24th, 2022, that is a date that those of us who've been in the pro-life movement are going to remember for the rest of our lives. I remember exactly where I was when it was announced that the Dobbs decision had come out. That was the case, obviously, that was dealing with Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban. And in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court said, and Justice Alito writing the majority opinion, that Roe v. Wade was erroneously decided, grievously decided 49 years prior. So this is exciting. This is something we should celebrate.
That's a very long time for a horror like abortion to be institutionalized nationwide in the United States simply by an out-of-control activist court. And one of the things we need to note is that the court will be doing the country no favors in this. It will be righting a wrong, but it was the court's wrong.
Justice Alito stated, procuring an abortion is not a fundamental constitutional right because such a right has no basis in the Constitution's text or in our nation's history.
What Dobbs did was just send the question of pro-life policies back to the 50 states. And so now what was a battle that we were fighting in Washington, D.C., this is something that every local community in every state gets to decide for themselves.
In some states, there'll be more abortion than there's ever been. Other states, there won't be any. Frankly, I'm thrilled to be in a state where there won't be any.
If you look at the U.S. states, we have 19 states that protect life at conception, and almost all those are in effect right now, but some have been held up in state-level litigation. But for the most part, those are in effect. 4 states protect life when a child's heartbeat can be detected. That can be detected as early as 5 weeks gestation or up to about 7 weeks. And then there's 7 states that have some gestational limit. Florida has a 15-week limit all the way up to about 24 weeks, which is what Pennsylvania, my home state, has. And then you have the big bad 20 states that will continue. Roe v. Wade basically didn't impact those states in any way, shape, or form. They allowed elective abortion through all 9 months up till Roe v. Wade fell and still continue to. So that's the landscape.
There's also an effort in Congress to pass a federal abortion law, which would legalize abortion in all 50 states.
So when Roe v. Wade was overturned, Congress came back, and the first thing they did was vote on the most radical abortion bill that Congress has ever seen. It's called the Women's Health Protection Act, but it does nothing of the sort to protect women's health. So pro-abortion Democrats in both the Senate and House see that there is clearly a federal role on abortion, and that role is to dictate to the states that they must allow elective abortion through all 9 months. That's what their bill would do. It's couched as a codification of Roe v. Wade, but that's really selling it short. It would essentially undermine any state law that protects life in any way, shape, or form, would maybe force doctors to perform abortions against their conscience.
I believe there's actually a right to life in our founding documents. I think you can interpret that from the wording of our Constitution, and I think our Declaration of Independence, particularly the second paragraph, where it says that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these, the right to life. I've always thought that was a remarkable thing that our founders, even before there were sonograms, understood that without the right to life, the other rights are sort of beside the point.
Following the reversal of Roe, many on the radical left have been peddling false claims about state abortion laws. For instance, saying that women won't receive treatment for ectopic pregnancies.
Now, doctors among those concerned about the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and how it will affect the way they treat their patients. Dr. Nanda, you know, a lot of passion on both sides of this, but I gotta ask you, how will treatment for miscarriage be impacted by this?
In practical terms, getting the right treatment on time without barriers or questioning might be very challenging.
The left has come with just so many lies and so much misinformation that it's been overwhelming for us as pro-lifers, as Christians, as conservatives to try to counter it all.
They've been framing it as really about these exceptions. What about those horrific cases where a young girl's raped, or there's a case of incest, or can women still get treatment for ectopic pregnancies and life-saving medical care? When the national media is now telling them you can't get ectopic pregnancy treatments if that's something happening to you, when that's not the facts. So lie, misinformation, and really a radical position that they've been voting on since Roe v. Wade was overturned.
This idea that we're going to round up women and arrest them, we've got to push back and quit letting that be said without a fight.
I think we're going to see hysteria from the radical pro-abortion fringe. Abortion has become a kind of religion to some in this country, where it is sort of the mark of whether or not women are free and whether or not we can prosper, which is such a tragedy and injustice to see our empowerment and advancement through the lens of killing the necessary, somehow we have to kill a child to succeed, to achieve our dreams. No authentic advancement was ever won on the body of another, by killing or harming another, especially a child, especially your child, your son or your daughter.
A recent poll shows that 48% of Americans support restricting abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy.
The American public, on the whole, is pro-life. Whether they support life at conception or not, that still is a minority position. People are horrified by late-term abortions. They do not want their taxpayers to fund abortions or abortion providers. So on the whole, America is much more pro-life than what Democrats think they are.
I'm going to work to make sure that all 50 states get rid of abortion. But it's okay if states are different. That's how things have always been in America, that we didn't have a national law that imposed a national position on everybody on every issue. Nations fracture when you do that because people are different. I mean, it's a huge country. And the idea that people living in the Mountain West are going to be the same as people living in Rhode Island, well, it's just, you can't expect that. And our founders didn't expect that, even in a smaller territory. And so that's an important part for people to understand, and the left doesn't like that idea. They want people to conform to their ideology. They are not for freedom of religion, they are not for freedom of conscience, they are not for freedom of anything. What they are for is the freedom for them to impose on you what they think is best. That's their freedom.
With the issue of life now in the hands of elected officials, voting in the upcoming election has never been more important for the pro-life cause.
There will be future referendum, there will be future legislative debates, and the pro-life movement needs to be organized. We need to be in a position where we can advocate. We need to strengthen the politicians so that they are out there defending life and speaking favorably about the life issue and not being afraid and running away from it.
In Virginia last year, when they voted out these people that wanted to kill babies, right up to the moment of their birth, they wanted to be able to kill babies, and maybe beyond that. People were getting fed up, and it impacted in the way they voted. They voted for pro-life people.
The pro-life cause is at an inflection point. We've been fighting for 50 years for a victory, but not the win of the battle, which is to truly protect unborn life through all 9 months in all 50 states. So Roe v. Wade being overturned is a big change, and it's a victory in the war. But right now the real work begins in the states and definitely in Congress.
We need to remind people that this is really a decision between people who believe in every human life having intrinsic worth and value, believing that the child with Down syndrome is every bit as valuable as is the captain of the football team. That's where we stand, versus those who believe that right up until the very moment of birth, at 9 months, that if a mother decides she just doesn't want that baby, that she can take its life. And that is, I just don't believe that thoughtful, rational, civil Americans honestly think that abortion anytime, any moment, for any reason, is a reasonable view about abortion.
The pro-life movement has made gains. There's going to take time to really bring back the ethic that truly existed in America up till 1973, which is to protect unborn life in the womb and mothers. That was not questioned really for much of U.S. history until 1973, but now we're on a different age where we have to bring back a pro-life ethic to our culture, where you have forces, money, an industry, and media really pushing the envelope that abortion is not just necessary, it's needed, but it's actually good and should be celebrated. So there's a lot of work cut out, but through messaging, education, public policy, and definitely winning elections, I think the pro-life cause can prevail.